It began with a glass of water and the sound of a plastic pill bottle rattling on the polished mahogany table. That sound used to be comforting. It meant routine. It meant stability. Now it was a signal, a weakness they had learned to exploit. I was 78 years old. 78 years of building things. A career. A house. A family. I spent 30 years worrying about their futures, about scholarships, about down payments, about what kind of people they would become. I never worried about my own ending, not until Evelyn was gone. When my wife died, the air left the house, and then, slowly, the respect started to leave too. My son, David, and his wife, Clara, insisted I move into the spare wing of their massive suburban home. It sounded like care. It felt like consignment. I was the package they couldn't quite figure out where to store. They were good people by the standards of the community. They drove expensive cars. They attended every school function. They were, however, terrible children. They loved the idea of Dad living with them. It looked good on paper. It justified the larger mortgage interest deduction. It solidified their claim on the eventual estate. They did not, however, love me. The last few months had been rough. The tremors in my right hand grew worse. The doctor prescribed a new course of treatment, a specialized injectable medication. It wasn't cheap. It was, however, necessary if I wanted to continue tying my own shoes or holding a cup without spilling. The pharmacy slip arrived on a Thursday. The bill was substantial. It required approval from David, who now managed my accounts under the guise of protecting me from scams. Sunday arrived. The house smelled strongly of roasted rosemary and forced cheer. Family lunch. My 3 grandchildren, Ethan, 12, and the twins, Chloe and Lucas, 10, were busy arguing over a video game. David and Clara were discussing their upcoming trip to the Mediterranean. I waited until the dessert plates were cleared and the air settled into that post-meal heaviness. I cleared my throat. The small sound felt enormous in their kitchen. "David," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. The tremors were already making my chest tight. I spoke with Dr. Ramirez again. We need to start the new medication right away. It's critical for slowing the progression. David didn't look up from his phone. He was checking stock tickers. "Yes, Dad, we saw the bill." His voice was flat, businesslike. Clara, however, set down her spoon with a deliberate clink. That sound always meant a financial meeting was about to begin, and I was the balance sheet item they were reviewing. "Arthur," Clara began, using my first name, which always felt like a disciplinary measure. "We've run the numbers. The cost is prohibitive. It's almost $7,000 a month, even with your supplemental insurance." I felt a cold shock travel down my spine. "It's $7,000 a month for me to keep my dignity, Clara. I needed to function." David finally lowered the phone, but his eyes were narrowed, calculating. "Dad, let's be realistic. The doctor says it slows the symptoms. It doesn't reverse anything. You're already 78. 78. He said the number like it was a sentence, a definite expiration date that made any expensive maintenance redundant. "It gives me years," I protested. "Years of quality life. Years of being able to read to Ethan without my hands shaking too much." Ethan, bless him, looked up briefly, sensing the tension, before Clara shot him a sharp look. Clara leaned forward, her voice dropping, assuming the tone of gentle, superior reason. "Arthur, think about the bigger picture. We have so many financial obligations right now. The twins are going into competitive soccer. Ethan starts high school next year, and we have to be smart about the future." She didn't mention pour their future. She meant the college funds. I knew exactly what she was talking about. 20 years ago, when the children were still babies, I had set up 3 specific trust accounts, educational savings bonds. They were non-liquid, high yield, and untouchable until the child turned 18. untouchable by David and Clara, that is. But the accounts were still tied to my master investment portfolio. I was the only primary account holder. I was the signatory. David picked up the thread, his voice gaining that smooth, manipulative edge I hated. Look, Dad, we love you. We want you comfortable. But $7,000 a month for a marginal improvement, that's almost $84,000 a year. That's Ethan's first 2 years of state university right there. He wasn't arguing for my health. He was arguing for their ease. They had decided that my remaining life was less valuable than the hypothetical cost of a college dorm room 10 years from now. So you're saying, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, forcing myself to hold their gaze, that my ability to live without constant discomfort and reliance on you is less important than money that won't even be touched for another 8 years? Clara sighed, a dramatic, suffering sound. Don't be dramatic, Arthur. It's about being responsible stewards of the family wealth. We can manage the tremors with physical therapy and standard inexpensive medication. You'll be fine. You just have to adjust your expectations. Adjust my expectations. That was the new theme of my elderly life. Adjust your expectations of dignity. Adjust your expectations of respect. Adjust your expectations of care. They didn't deny me the medication because they couldn't afford it. David and Clara had a combined income well into the high six figures. They denied it because they were calculating the return on investment of my comfort, and the return was zero. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back against the floor. The sound startled the children. I understand, I said. My voice was suddenly very calm. Too calm. David looked slightly uneasy at my lack of argument. He expected a fight. He expected tears. He expected guilt-tripping. He didn't expect the quiet calculation that had just begun behind my eyes. Good, Clara chirped, instantly relieved. See, it's just budgeting, Arthur. We're being fiscally mature. I left the table and walked towards the quiet solitude of the wing they had assigned me. My mind was racing, but my exterior was ice. I went straight to the small antique writing desk I had insisted on bringing. It was filled with old envelopes, sentimental junk, and crucially, the original login details for the investment accounts. I sat down and let the betrayal wash over me fully. They saw me as a sunk cost, a liability. They were rationing my health so they could keep the BMW payments and the exclusive summer camps and, yes, the college bonds that I, not them, had set up. I created those accounts specifically to give Ethan, Chloe, and Lucas a good start. I poured years of extra dividends and bonuses into those 3 names. The irony was acidic. They were denying me life support, using the justification of futures I had already paid for. They had drawn a line in the sand. My pain versus their portfolio. I looked down at the old envelope. On it, in my handwriting from 2005, were the security questions and the 8-digit account number. I hadn't needed to log into the main portfolio account in years. David had access to the monthly statements, but the authorization keys for liquidation or transfer were still hard linked to my old protected email address and phone number. They thought I was fading. They thought I was technologically incompetent. They thought they had secured all my assets. They forgot that the man who built the fortune knows exactly where the trapdoors are. I opened the laptop, the old one they never bothered to check, assuming it was only used for solitaire and emails with my brother. The screen lit up my face in the fading afternoon light. I logged into the bank's main investment portal. The interface was familiar, dated and secure. There they were, 3 separate lines, green substantial numbers, educational bonds, E. David, C. Claire, L. Marcus, Ethan David, Chloe Claire, Lucas Marcus. The funds were large, more than enough to cover my medication for 10 years, and then some. I moved the mouse pointer. My hand was steady now. The fury provided a strange, absolute calm. I realized I wasn't doing this to hurt them. Not exactly. I was doing this to save myself. I was reclaiming my dignity, the only way a discarded elder can, by reminding the children that the source of the river still controlled the flow. I clicked on the first line, Ethan's College Fund. A drop-down menu appeared. The options were clear: transfer, liquidate, reassign. I paused. This was the moment of no return, the moment where Arthur, the quiet, obedient father, died, and Arthur, the sovereign elder, took control. If I did this, their trust, minimal as it was, would shatter. They would call it vengeance. They would call it irrational. They would call it cruel. I called it freedom. I moved the cursor to the word I needed. I took a deep breath. I thought of Clara's smug, calculating face. I thought of David's cold dismissal. I thought of the pill bottle rattling on the table. I clicked. I started typing the destination account number, my private holding account, the one they didn't know existed. The transfer process began slowly, asking for two-factor authentication. My phone vibrated with the verification code. I knew, with chilling certainty, that by the time they received the quarterly statement showing 3 zeros where the college funds used to be, I would be well on my way to recovery. And they would finally realize that they had denied the wrong man. The first transfer verification screen loaded. It required final confirmation. I looked at the screen for a long, quiet minute. The sun was fully gone now. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of the grandchildren laughing upstairs. I was about to change everything. I typed in the code. I hit confirm. The screen flashed green. Success. I closed the laptop quickly, the quiet click echoing in the stillness of the room. I didn't want the children to hear the sound of the future collapsing. The next step would require more careful planning. The destination account was safe, but I needed access to cash, physical cash, and I needed to make sure David could never touch the principal investment portfolio again. I put the laptop away. The silence of the room was heavy with the weight of my decision. The first act was complete, but the war had just begun. I needed to secure the house, and then I needed to make the next 3 transfers. Tonight. The silence after they left was heavier than any spoken word. It was the silence of a tomb. Sarah's voice, so clear and sharp, still echoed in the living room. Dad, it's $7,000 a month. That's just not feasible right now. Michael had nodded, looking at his expensive watch. It's a temporary setback, Thomas. We'll look at generics. Be patient. They called me Thomas now. Not Dad, not Father. Just Thomas, the expensive object taking up space and demanding funds they felt belonged elsewhere. I sat there, gripping the arms of my recliner. My body ached, but the pain in my chest was not physical. It was the absolute clarity of betrayal. They had calculated the numbers. They had run the cost-benefit analysis. My life, my comfort, my remaining dignity weighed against 2 semesters of college for Sarah's son, Liam. Weighed against the trip Michael's wife wanted to take to the Mediterranean. My health was a luxury they could not afford for me, because they needed those funds for their luxuries. I looked around the house I bought in 1978, the house I worked 3 jobs to keep, the house they now treated as a future asset, divided cleanly in the will I had yet to finalize. They spoke about the financial strain, the pressure, but I knew the truth. The truth was, they had forgotten who earned that money in the first place. I remembered the days, 30 years ago, when I set up those educational funds, 529 plans, government bonds. I put money away religiously. Every bonus, every tax return, every unexpected small win went straight into those accounts. I did it for them, my children. I did it for the grandchildren I hadn't even met yet. I did it because that is what parents do. They build safe harbors for the future. Sarah's Liam was 18 now. starting college in the fall. He was going to the state university, a good school. His 529 plan was plump. Michael's daughter Emily was a junior in high school. Her college savings were even healthier. We had been more aggressive with the investments by then. I remember signing the documents. I was the grantor. I was the primary custodian. I had given them the money, yes. But I still held the keys. They never thought I would use them. Why would I? I was their father. Fathers are supposed to simply fade away, leaving everything intact for the next generation. Fathers are not supposed to fight back. I waited until the evening shadows had fully consumed the house. The prescription bottle was still sitting on the counter, empty, a cruel reminder of the medication I was now supposed to ration, to stretch until the pain was unbearable. They had promised to look into generics. They meant they would wait until I was desperate enough to agree to substandard care, just so they didn't have to touch Liam's tuition. I went to my small study, the room they always tried to convince me to convert into a home gym or a reading nook for their visits. It was dusty. I hadn't used the old desktop in months. I wiped the monitor with the sleeve of my cardigan. The light hurt my eyes. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from the sudden, terrifying clarity of my intent. This was not a moment of anger. This was an execution of policy, survival policy. I turned the computer on. The ancient machine whirred to life, groaning under the pressure. I had always been meticulous about paperwork. Passwords were not saved in the browser. I had a small physical notebook hidden deep in the back of the file cabinet, a ledger of 2 decades of savings history. I found the book. The numbers were there, the account numbers, the specific security questions I had created years ago, questions only I would know. My children had access, of course, the general viewing dashboards, but they did not have the administrative clearance. That required my unique two-factor authentication, my personal phone number. I opened the First Financial Institution's website. The interface was modern and clean. It seemed mocking, professional, efficient. I typed in the first login, Sarah's son, Liam, account number, beginning with 788. It took me 3 tries to get the password right. My fingers felt clumsy, heavy. The screen loaded. There it was, the total value, a robust 6-figure sum, waiting patiently for the fall semester. It represented my 40 years of working under fluorescent lights. It represented the vacations I never took, the new cars I postponed, the sacrifice of a better life funneled into the future of others. And they had used that sacrifice as the very reason to deny me the present. The terms of the 529 plan were clear. As the custodian, I could change the beneficiary. I could roll it over, or, crucially, I could withdraw the funds. The fine print detailing the penalties for non-educational withdrawal didn't matter to me now. The taxes didn't matter. Losing 10% to the government was a small price for regaining control over the remaining 90%. I clicked the withdrawal option. A small dialog box popped up. Reason for withdrawal? I didn't pause. I typed, emergency medical expense. I initiated the liquidation of all assets within the account. The total sum was to be transferred to my personal private account, the one they didn't know about, which I kept strictly for unexpected crises. The system asked me to confirm the action. It warned me of the financial implications, the lost growth potential, the penalty. I clicked confirm. A confirmation email landed instantly in my inbox. The transfer was irreversible. The money would settle within 3 business days. It was done. Liam's college fund vanished. A tremendous cold wave washed over me. Not victory, not even bitterness, just a hollow, deep certainty. I closed the tab. Then I opened the second website. Michael's daughter, Emily. Account number, beginning with 912. This one was slightly larger. She was younger, and the investments had matured more aggressively. The process was identical. Login, withdrawal, emergency medical expense, transfer, confirm. I did not look at the numbers this time. I looked straight ahead at the wall, at the framed photo of my wife and me, taken long ago on a beach trip we only managed because we had saved just enough extra before dedicating everything to those college plans. It was faster this time, mechanical. When the second confirmation email arrived, I logged out of both systems. I closed the notebook. I shut down the computer. The silence returned. But it was different now. It was the silence of a man who had just dismantled the legacy he had spent half a century building. I had been betrayed by my blood, and I had responded by pulling the financial rug out from under the generation they cherished more than me. I walked back into the living room. The streetlights cast weak yellow bars across the carpet. I felt the familiar throb of pain rising in my joints, but it seemed distant now, secondary. I had the money now, enough to cover the medication for the rest of the year, enough to buy time, enough to ensure my dignity would not be measured against the cost of a degree. They would not know until morning, or perhaps later, when the financial notifications pinged on their phones. They would be furious. They would call me names. They would accuse me of malice and selfishness. They would be right, in the narrowest definition of the word. But they would not understand the calculation I had made on that cold floor tonight. Survival is more expensive than tuition. I took the stairs slowly, one heavy step at a time, leaning on the railing. I was tired. Profoundly, fundamentally tired. Tomorrow they would find out. And tomorrow, the war would truly begin. I was ready for it. I had my resources secured. I reached the top landing, the floorboards groaning slightly beneath my weight. I needed to sleep. I needed to be strong. I needed to decide what to do about the house. It was the last thing they expected to keep, and I still held the title. That would be the next conversation. But for now, the ledger was balanced. I had bought my life back. I had logged in, and their funds were gone. The night was endless, stretched thin by the glow of the screen. The old laptop felt heavy on my knees, a tangible weight of history and impending change. I didn't need to look up the passwords. I had started those funds. I had managed them for decades. The numbers, the logins, they were branded onto my memory, just like the sting of their refusal. They told me the medication was extravagant. They used that word, extravagant, as if survival was a luxury item I needed to cut from the budget. "We just can't spare the cash flow right now, Grandpa," Michael had said, his face etched with performative concern. "Amelia's tuition deposit is due in 2 weeks. It's too much of a strain." I remember looking at the checkbook I was still allowed to manage. The number was small. The price of my continued health was negligible compared to the futures they were building, and yet they chose the future over the present. I logged into the first 529 plan. It was in Amelia's name. My granddaughter, sweet, sharp, focused on law school. I loved that girl deeply. I pictured her smiling face, the one she made when she promised to take care of me someday. But the promise was worthless if I wasn't there to receive it. The login process was automated, terrifyingly quick. The system didn't ask for emotional justification. It just asked for confirmation. The balance appeared on the screen, a staggering number that represented 20 years of disciplined savings, gifts, and matching contributions. Most of it, my contributions. Money diverted from my own retirement funds to ensure they started life unburdened. I moved the cursor to the liquidation tab. There was a warning about penalties for early withdrawal. A percentage would be lost, subtracted from the total. I didn't hesitate. I checked the box that acknowledged the fee structure. The system calculated the penalty. It was substantial. I accepted it immediately. The fee was insignificant compared to the cost of my dignity. I hit confirm. The screen flashed green. A confirmation email was sent to the linked address. Michael's email, of course. He wouldn't check it at 3 a.m. He was sound asleep, dreaming of his daughter's bright future, assured that my quiet suffering was manageable. I had 30 seconds of intense, chilling clarity. In that moment, I felt less like a grandfather and more like a financial adjuster, correcting a terrible imbalance. The funds were moving out of the 529 plan, away from Amelia's future tuition, directly into a holding account I had set up months ago, under my name, at a completely separate institution they knew nothing about. It felt surgical, clean, a profound betrayal carried out through a sterile web interface. I moved on to Matthew's account, my grandson who wanted to design bridges. He was the quieter one, the one who brought me ginger ale when I had a rough night, even after his parents told him not to bother me. His parents, Sarah and Robert, were the ones who sat me down last winter, right after my wife passed, and told me that selling the house now would be prudent for estate planning. Prudent for them, not for me. They wanted their inheritance liquid. They wanted my asset to become their cash. They were the ones who called the specialty drugs frivolous expenditure. Matthew's account was structured differently, a mix of municipal bonds and low-risk investments. It required several extra steps to liquidate the assets first. The system asked for my physical signature on a digital form authorizing the bond sale. My hands were steady, too steady. I used the trackpad to sign my name, a shaky but legible script, finalizing the sale of Matthew's architectural dreams. The total amount removed across both accounts was significant, enough to pay for my medicine for the next 5 years, enough to hire a full-time, round-the-clock caregiver, enough to live out my remaining time with the peace and safety they had intentionally withdrawn. I watched the balances drop to near zero. A few dollars remained, maintenance minimums, a subtle hint that the account hadn't been fully deleted, just utterly gutted. I sat back, the air tight in my chest. The deed was done. There was no rush of victory, no sweet surge of revenge, only a hollow ache. I had just dismantled the dreams of the people I loved most in the world, not because I was vindictive, but because they had leveraged those dreams against my own survival. They had drawn a line, your life or their college degree. I had simply chosen my life, a choice they had left for me to make, while they slept soundly, believing they had already made the decision for me. I spent the next hour securing the new funds, moving them swiftly into several different instruments, complicated enough that even if they discovered the money had vanished, tracing its final destination would be nearly impossible without a full forensic audit, which would be expensive, time-consuming, and require legal action they might hesitate to pursue. I changed all my existing passwords, not just banking, but email, utility accounts, anything they might have access to, anything that might connect back to this night. I wiped the laptop's history clean, every cookie, every record of the transfer. I packaged the laptop carefully and placed it back in the closet, the place where only I accessed it. It was 4:15 a.m. The house was cold. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a small cup of tea, careful not to wake the dogs. The silence now was different. It wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the heavy silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped. I had fired the shot. Now I waited for the explosion. How long until they noticed? It could be days. It could be weeks. Tuition deadlines for Amelia were approaching rapidly. That would be the trigger. I needed to be ready. I went into the master bedroom, where my wife's empty side of the bed remained perfectly made. I opened the small locked box under my ties. Inside were the documents I had drafted with the lawyer last month, the updated power of attorney, the completely rewritten will. I had included a clause specific to my house, ensuring that if anything happened to me, the property would go into a conservatorship, sold immediately, and the proceeds donated to the Specialized Cancer Research Foundation my wife supported. Not one penny of that equity, which they coveted so deeply, would pass to Michael or Sarah. Not after they had signed my death warrant over an education fund I primarily paid for. The house, the college funds, the inheritance, all the things they saw as commodities tied to my continued existence, were now utterly disconnected from their grasp. I placed the documents back in the box, the paper cool against my fingertips. Tomorrow, the pharmacy was delivering the expensive, extravagant medication I needed. The medicine that would keep me breathing, keep me functioning, keep me alive. The cost was covered, paid for, in full, by the future they had deemed more valuable than my present. I closed my eyes, exhausted but strangely calm. The next part would be the confrontation, the weeping, the demanding, the absolute fury when they realized that the well they drank from was dry. But I would be strong, I would be medicated, and I would finally be free of their financial calculus. I knew this action would irrevocably change my relationship with my family. It was a line drawn in the sand, a declaration of war. But I was ready for war. They taught me how to fight it, and my dignity, bought back at such a terrible price, was worth the coming storm. I just needed to make sure I had my story straight for the moment Michael called, screaming about the zero balance. I planned to tell him the truth, simply and quietly. When you denied my medication, I would say, I logged in. But first, I needed to wait for the sun to rise and confirm the funds had settled into their new safe home. I needed to see that receipt, and then I would prepare for the fallout. The silence of the morning held the heavy anticipation of their discovery. It would not be long now. The morning after I logged in felt strangely cold. Not cold like the fear I'd lived with for months. Cold like granite. Finished. I felt weaker, physically. The medication I should have taken weeks ago was a ghost in my system. My breath was shallow, but my mind was clearer than it had been since the doctor gave me the estimate. They had traded my health for a number on a screen. I had just balanced the ledger. I went about my routine slowly. Toast, lukewarm coffee, the newspaper I could barely focus on. I waited. I knew the chaos wouldn't start immediately. They only checked those accounts once a month, unless there was a big deposit due. But today was Sunday, and Sundays meant brunch, and brunch meant talking about the future, their future. They arrived precisely at 11:30. My son, Robert, and his wife, Clara, my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark. The four of them, dressed in their Sunday best, ready to discuss the family portfolio over my lukewarm lasagna. The grandchildren were upstairs, oblivious, playing loud video games with the volume up, exactly as they knew I disliked. I greeted them from the armchair, careful not to stand too quickly. Robert started immediately, leaning against the doorway, already talking about the trip to Aspen they were planning for Christmas. "We'll rent the big chalet this year, Dad," Robert said, waving a hand. "The one with the hot tub. We can afford it now that the third quarter returns are solid." Clara chimed in. "And we were just going to look at colleges with Liam next month. It's comforting knowing that 529 is locked in." The comfort, the sheer, solid arrogance of their comfort. It was built entirely on the expectation of my compliance. I just nodded, offering a tight, fragile smile. "That sounds lovely, dear." They ate, they laughed, they planned. I watched them, feeling like an anthropological observer, studying a distant, slightly ridiculous tribe. The trigger wasn't me, it was Sarah. After the dishes were cleared, she settled at the dining table, pulling out her laptop. She was the family accountant, always fiddling with budgets. "Just checking the liquidity for next semester's tuition deposit," she murmured, tapping keys briskly. "It's due early this year. Good thing those municipal bonds matured right on time." A minute passed, then two. The kitchen noises continued. Then a cough, a shallow, strange sound. Robert, Sarah said, her voice dropping. It was too quiet, a dangerous quiet. Robert, who had been discussing the stock market with Mark, looked over, annoyed at the interruption. What is it, Sarah? I'm explaining the concept of short selling to Mark. The college funds, she repeated, louder this time. Her fingers were frozen on the keyboard. The trust accounts for the children. They aren't showing the balances. Clara rolled her eyes. It's probably just a bank server update, Sarah. Stop panicking. They always do maintenance on Sundays. Sarah ignored her, clicking violently on the screen. No, I was just in here yesterday. The money is gone. The sudden silence in the house was absolute. Even the loud explosions from the video games upstairs seemed to vanish. Robert crossed the room in 3 strides, leaning over the screen. His face went from relaxed confidence to a tight, mottled purple. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Is the website glitching? The balance is 0 on all 3 accounts. Every bond, every share, every dime of the college savings plan liquidated and transferred out. Her voice was high-pitched, almost a shriek. I sat in my armchair, perfectly still. I closed my eyes briefly, savoring the sound of their world shattering. "Call the broker! Call the emergency line!" Robert roared. He wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking at the ceiling, as if expecting the funds to rain down again. Sarah frantically punched numbers into her phone. Mark grabbed his own tablet and started checking different sources, confirming the catastrophe. It took 20 agonizing minutes for them to get through the security protocols, to talk to a person who could actually see the history of the accounts. I listened to the half-muffled conversation, understanding every single keyword. Date of transfer, authorization, primary account holder. Sarah slammed the phone down onto the antique table, making the crystal vase jump. "It wasn't fraud," she whispered, staring blankly at the wall. The broker confirmed it. Every transaction was signed off digitally, using the credentials of the primary account holder. Robert grabbed the phone and shouted into the receiver, "Who is the primary account holder? Tell me the name." The broker, calmly upholding policy, must have confirmed the truth. Robert lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Sarah, then at Mark, then at Clara. His gaze was searching, desperate for a scapegoat. "It was Grandpa Arthur," he finally breathed out, the words tasting like ash. "He set up those trusts 15 years ago. He retained primary digital authorization. The accusation was not aimed at me yet. It was aimed at the impossible thought itself. No, Grandpa wouldn't." They clustered together, whispering urgently. "Did he forget he did it?" Clara hissed. "Maybe he transferred it to a high-interest savings account by mistake?" "No," Sarah countered, shaking her head sharply. "The transfer history shows a direct liquidation of all assets, followed by 3 separate transfers to an offshore brokerage account. That last part was a slight exaggeration I had engineered through smart routing, just to make the trail look harder to follow. The money was safe, sitting exactly where I wanted it, under my complete control, accessible by a separate, untraceable device. Their eyes finally landed on me. I was sitting in the gloom of the living room, a frail, tired old man whose body was failing him because of their choices. Robert walked toward me, his movements rigid, like a robot whose joints were seizing up. "Dad," his voice was unnaturally low, dangerous. Did you go into the children's college funds yesterday?" I looked him straight in the eye and held my breath to steady myself. "The college funds?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, feigning confusion. "Oh dear, are they having trouble with the website again?" This infuriated him. "Don't play the confused old man, Dad. We know you logged in. Everything is gone. 47 years of saving, gone in one night. What did you do with the money? I sighed, leaning back into the cushions. The pain in my chest flared, serving as a bitter reminder of the stakes. Robert, you know I haven't been myself lately, I said, choosing my words carefully, drawing on every ounce of dramatic calm I possessed. I'm not feeling well at all. You remember how much the doctor stressed the importance of that specialist drug? The non sequitur slammed into their investigation. It brought the conversation crashing back to the real point of conflict. Don't change the subject, Clara cried out from the hallway. We are talking about Liam's future, about Maya's medical school application. And I am talking about my present, I replied, my voice gaining strength, cutting through their panic. I am talking about dignity. I am talking about the ability to breathe without constant grinding pain. The medication, Robert. Did you sort out the prescription? He stared at me, his eyes wide with the realization that this was not a mistake. This was a statement, a transaction. The drug costs $80,000. Dad, we told you that. It would wipe out the liquidity in the family trust. We were going to look into cheaper alternatives. Cheaper alternatives for breathing? I countered, raising an eyebrow. It seems you preferred the cheaper alternative of letting your father slowly suffocate in order to guarantee a comfortable college experience for children who won't even call their grandfather on his birthday. The air thickened with unspoken accusations. They knew I was capable of complex financial maneuvers. They just never thought I would use that knowledge against them. Tell us where the money is, Dad, Sarah pleaded, trying a softer approach. We'll put it back. We'll forgive you for this lapse. I smiled a thin, weary smile. Forgive me, I repeated softly. There is nothing to forgive. I simply moved assets that were legally mine. They are safe, extremely safe, in fact. Safer than my own life has been in this house lately. I watched their faces contort with greed and fear. They were trapped. The funds were gone. And I, the sick elderly man they had decided was expendable, was the key to their entire future. So, what now, Dad? Robert finally asked, his voice shaking with restrained fury. Is this a ransom? I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees, every movement slow and deliberate. It is justice, Robert. Poetic justice, if you like. You asked me to choose between my life and your children's tuition. I chose both. Now, it is your turn. I paused, letting the silence scream the condition I was about to state. Call the pharmacy. Get the medication authorized immediately, regardless of cost. Set up the transfer for the surgeon's fee tomorrow morning. Their silence was the answer. They were weighing the life of their father against the education of their children. If the prescription is filled by noon tomorrow, I continued, my voice steady, then we can discuss the return of the funds. Until then, those accounts remain zero, and every passing hour I wait for my dignity. The harder it will be to put things back exactly as they were. I watched Robert pull out his phone, his hand trembling. He looked lost, caught between the sheer monetary disaster and the sudden, terrifying realization that the man he thought he controlled was holding all the cards. The fight was far from over. I knew they would try to appeal to sentiment, to bypass my authority, perhaps even to challenge my mental state. But for tonight, the fear belonged to them. I had given them their assignment. I had made them choose. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that they would never look at my armchair or my quiet resignation the same way again. The ledger was balanced. The consequences were just beginning. The morning after, I felt strangely empty, not regretful, but lightened. The weight of their expectation had been removed. I had broken the covenant, but they were the ones who had first fractured the stone tablet. I sat in the kitchen, drinking cool water. I waited for the firestorm. It took Michael exactly 17 hours to discover the change. He was attempting to register for his final semester's classes. The tuition payment bounced. My phone rang. The screen flashed his frantic, enraged name. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then Sarah called. Her voice was already laced with hysterics. "Dad, what did you do? The 529 account is gone. Completely liquidated. Michael says the bond portfolio is zeroed out." I finally picked up the phone. I kept my voice low, steady. "Hello, Sarah." Don't. "Hello, Sarah, me. Where is the money? That was earmarked. That was his future," he shrieked. "It was my money," I corrected her softly. "And my future was cancelled last week, wasn't it? This is not fair, Dad. You can't just take years of savings because of one argument about medication." "It wasn't one argument, Sarah. It was a vote. A corporate decision made by my children. You and Michael decided that the expense of keeping your father alive was too high a premium for your comfort." I hung up before she could respond. I didn't want to argue over the phone. I wanted to see their faces when they understood the finality of their mistake. They arrived that evening. They didn't even bother to knock properly. They burst into the living room, a torrent of accusation and disbelief. "You stole it!" Michael yelled. He was 21, fully grown, but acting like a toddler whose favorite toy had been snatched. "I can't steal what is legally mine," I said, pointing to the paperwork on the coffee table. The transfer documents, the new medical escrow account details. Sarah snatched the papers. Her eyes scanned the numbers. The realization of the finality wiped the aggression from her face, replacing it with sickening fear. "You put it all into this medical trust?" she whispered. "I did," I confirmed. "I had a crisis of health. I needed funds guaranteed for survival. You guaranteed me nothing but hardship and humiliation." Michael paced. "But Dad, this was our college money. We based our careers on that fund. Now, what are we supposed to do? Drop out?" The sheer self-centeredness of his concern was staggering. They mourned the loss of money they were only entitled to. After I was dead, or at least comfortably stable and quiet. "You can take out loans," I suggested calmly. "Millions of young people do it every year. You can work part-time. You can learn the value of earning your keep." Sarah looked devastated. "You are punishing us. We are your children. Why are you doing this to us?" "I am securing my existence," I corrected her again firmly. "You had a choice. You could have ensured my medication was paid for, maintaining the agreement for your tuition. You chose the college fund over my life. I simply ratified your decision." I leaned forward. I looked directly into Michael's tear-filled eyes. "Listen to me, son. Your comfort was contingent upon my stability. When you voted against my stability, you cancelled the contract." The house was quiet again, a heavy, suffocating silence. They had run out of accusations, replaced by the grim knowledge that they had backed the wrong horse. They had underestimated the desperation of a man fighting for his own dignity. "You know, this means we might not be able to come home for Christmas," Sarah said, trying one last emotional manipulation. "That's a shame," I replied, standing up slowly. "I'll miss the company, but I will enjoy the freedom from guilt, knowing I have enough medicine in the pantry to make it through the entire holiday season." They lingered, awkwardly. They tried to plead, to bargain. They brought up the memories of childhood, the sacrifices I had made. "Yes, I made sacrifices," I acknowledged, "all of them willingly, until you demanded that my final sacrifice be my ability to breathe free from pain." They finally realized the wall was insurmountable. The money was gone, liquidated, signed, sealed, and protected by legal frameworks they couldn't penetrate without proving I was legally incompetent. A difficult task when I was arguing coherently and soundly, defending my financial decisions. Michael stormed out first, slamming the front door. Sarah followed him slowly, turning back on the porch. Are you happy, Dad? She asked, her voice broken. Did winning feel good? Happy? No, I admitted honestly. Relieved? Yes. Dignified? Absolutely. I watched them drive away. The taillights vanished down the street, leaving the darkness intact. The house felt cavernous. I was alone, but I was in control. I took the full dose of my evening medication, the one they had deemed too expensive. The pain began to recede almost immediately. I felt the warmth spread through my chest, a relief I had been denied for weeks. The cost was paid. My health was secured. But the emotional debt remained unsettled. They hadn't apologized for their betrayal. They had only lamented the loss of the money. I knew this wasn't the end. They would reorganize. They would attempt to challenge the trust, or perhaps try to seize control of my other assets, the house. They would see me not as a father to be loved, but as an estate to be conquered. I walked into my home office, the room where the financial war had begun. I opened the computer again. I had secured my medical life, but now I needed to secure my entire future. I needed to make sure that the ultimate inheritance, the house, the legacy, everything, was entirely out of their reach. Should they continue their campaign of entitlement and cruelty? I had already proven I would fight for my life. Now, I needed to ensure that fighting me was the most financially ruinous decision they could ever make. I started drafting the amendments to the existing will. It was time to choose a new executor, someone who understood the true definition of family. The evening was just beginning, and the final chapter of my sovereignty had yet to be written.